You have this stored emotion, this stored energy, that's taken a form from your upbringing of experiences of abandonment, of not being seen. And there would be thousands of experiences like that in the context of somebody's imprint over and over and over, in the context of somebody's upbringing and the ancestral trauma that comes with that, over and over and over. And so those are packed in firm. And so when you are being asked by spirit, by your karmic path, by God, by your higher self to let go of these things, it can be excruciating. And so it becomes a rite of passage. It becomes walking through the fire. That steam is akin to walking through the fire, walking through the coals. Of course, I'd want it to end. I'd much rather get out of the bathtub and go downstairs and watch TV and eat some ice cream. I knew that I needed to stay. And I had a dedication to that. I had a commitment to that, an inner commitment, an inner knowing that I needed to go through this threshold, these thresholds over and over and over and over. And very gradually over time, things began to lift. Into the fire, here we go. Into the fire, head to toe. Into the fire, to be seen. Into the fire, to be. Hello. This is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. Today I'm out looking at the beautiful lake at sunset. The lake is fairly still. There's a little bit of wind. There's some glimmer on the lake. There's something about it, that I would describe as magical, and it strikes me here and there in certain moments. And other moments, I just see it conceptually, I guess. I have an understanding what lake is. I have an understanding what glimmer is, and it doesn't really do much to me in my body, in my heart, in that present moment. I might be thinking about something else or distracted by one thing or another, maybe how I'm feeling or what I'm doing or what somebody else is saying or what's happening across the street or the noise that someone's making, or just enjoying the peace and quiet, enjoying the feeling in my body, the stillness, that, just a hint of tranquility when you go to the lake, when you're in these spaces without noticing the shimmer of the lake and the magic of it. It's really quite phenomenal. That is a natural phenomenon. Something that I certainly have taken for granted, not in a way that deserves any judgment per se. I wouldn't say that, but it's just difficult to be in the present moment and connect to this magic that's around us. And I could say that about the trees. I'm sitting under a hazelnut tree right now. And when I tap into that tree, the feeling that I get looking at the branches, seeing the branches waving, there's an essence there that I can pick up on and I can attune to. And it's really beautiful. It has a personality in a way. It has a tone, and it's very friendly. I mean, I'm sheltered under it. So there's this physical phenomenon that's happening, but there's more than that. There's an essence. There's like this quiet whisper, this quiet conversation that is happening when I attune to the energy of the tree, bringing my awareness, my conscious awareness to the tree and to my body somehow at the same time. Somehow those two phenomenon overlap, the attention to the tree, the attention to my body. Somehow they come into alignment. They overlap. They exist as one, all at the same time. Today I'm going to pick a topic. I'm speaking alone today. This is one of the solo podcasts. It's not a castaway. It's not a experimentation in stream of consciousness just to see what comes up without any preconception whatsoever, which I've done in a couple of previous podcasts, with an effect that, these podcasts aren't as popular, I'm noticing, but people are still listening, and I'm going to give them some time. I've listened back, and I do appreciate the experience and also the result. I don't know how often I'll do it, but there is something about it that speaks to me that feels relevant. in terms of the process that's unfolding for me, the exploration of this medium for me, and I'll give it some time for feedback. I read a Stephen King book called, I'm pretty sure it's called On Writing, and he says when he writes, his first draft is for himself. He doesn't worry about anything other than just what speaks to him, what he wants to write, and then the second draft, or when he's rewriting, he writes with the door open, he says, so allowing that the conversation to begin, even if it's speculative. He would be sending drafts out, and it would be literal as well as his own intuition based on writing something entertaining for others. It's definitely a different way of viewing the writing and being with the writing and being with the things that really speak to you personally and being able to let them go, killing your darlings, as they say in the screenwriting world, possibly the novel writing world, but that's something that came up as a screenwriter, something I did for many years. But no, I had a preconceived idea of what I want to talk about. Initially, I was quite clear that I'd be doing a solo cast, a castaway episode, but when it came time to actually record this episode, that changed. And so the subject that I want to delve into is loneliness. So that's those are the boundaries. I don't intend to go outside of those boundaries. I want to explore that topic, that experience to a certain extent in the context of the sacred village, that place that, I personally, in my heart and in my body and in my mind, are always, I'm always striving towards that feels like the highest level of actualization that there is, in a way, the paradigm of self-actualization and community actualization and cultural continuity. We getting further from the micro into the macro with each step, and starting, of course, with that most important piece, that aspect of self, working on thyself. It feels, put into the context of an elder that I had sat with many times. That was something that he shared. And it has a lot of, it's stayed with me. It has a lot of power for me. So where does loneliness fit in? It seems to fit into all three, and it seems to be a fundamental piece of all three in terms of the narrative of loneliness, what it means conceptually, to identify somebody as being lonely, to identify yourself as being lonely, to be alone, to be longing for company, longing for community, for connection, in many shapes and forms, whether it's with human beings or with a hazelnut tree. That connection, that feeling of loneliness, that longing to connect, it's the feeling. It starts with the feeling. What is that feeling? Where does it come from? What is it really on a deeper level? And how do we identify it? Why do we label it as such? What is the condition of being lonely? What is the condition of being stuck in either complete loneliness, a feeling that plagues an individual all the time, or the perpetual returning to a place of feeling lonely and identifying as being lonely or alone? What is that? How do we get there? And what do we do about it? I can certainly connect to that feeling. My primary wound, I would say, is abandonment and betrayal. Those words, they do have slightly different connotations. Betrayal is slightly more specific. When I use that word, I actually mean to say that there's a betrayal, an ancestral betrayal, perhaps a betrayal by the culture that I live in, by my parents, but I don't know, I don't really use that word to describe that, because my imprint, concept of having an imprint, being born with an imprint, so something that is karmic, that you're prescribed before you're even born, a part of your soul journey that's known to the cosmos, to the universe, to the spirits that surround us at birth and beyond, and of course to God. This imprint is, I see, in my mind's eye, this image of a path that returns an individual home. But an imprint to us humans, like from that human point of view, is somewhat tragic, because it's like, it's the circumstance, the emotional experience that we feel over and over again, inevitably, no matter how hard our parents try to give us what we need. There's an imprint that's inevitable. And even if those parents have the ability to circumvent this experience for another one of their children, somehow karmically, energetically, that imprint is going to take place. It will happen no matter what. And of course it, obviously aligns with the ancestral imprint and trauma that we are inheriting, that our parents have, and that they're very kindly passing on to us, while doing their best to avoid that, as conscious as they have the ability to be in that circumstance. It's still something that is our God-given path back home. And for me, that imprint is around, I would say specifically, it is about not feeling seen, not being seen. Yeah, maybe, but not feeling seen. Yes, certainly. That's my imprint. And from a very young age, I've had this experience of not being fully seen, and not being fully seen as a young person is very isolating, and it creates a feeling of aloneness. I've never really used the word loneliness. I've always tended to use, this is not conscious at all, maybe to a degree, but I didn't realize I was leaving out the word loneliness, but I've been tending to use the word aloneness, to be feeling alone and being of an other, different from the rest of the group, and not completely fitting in, whether it's in family or in hockey room, lockers, sports of all kinds, high school. And there were exceptions. I wouldn't really say that I felt alone or lonely when I was with my siblings, because they were not meant to fulfill that. I had an intuition that they were siblings and it wasn't their responsibility. With my parents, I didn't really know any different, but certainly in retrospect, as I grew older and as I made choices in relationships, and the longing that I had towards women, towards women who I sought after or was in relationship with, generally speaking, and not every time. It really depended on the paradigm. But generally speaking, there was this longing to be seen for who I was. And it took some time and maturation to realize that stemmed from my upbringing. And that with my parents, the experience of being truly seen, I never had that experience, I would say. Perhaps my parents would listen to this and wonder, what it is I'm talking about, because perhaps they would say that they do see me, like they know who I am, but I know that the stories that they have and had and continue to have, and it's certainly improving with time. There's this maturation of the relationship with time as I self-actualize. And so here's the segue, or let's say a nod towards the segue, the doorway out of loneliness, the doorway out of aloneness. is paradoxically within. To fully grasp this from the point of view of identifying as lonely, to identify as alone, there's external signifiers. There's an orientation and a narrative that is necessarily pointing outside of oneself as being a part of a circumstance where the external signifiers, these other people, this distance, this lack of connection with others, with other energies, let's say, but certainly, the typical narrative is with other people, that the loneliness requires the participation of other people to not want to be close to you, to not want to have a connection with you. In the case of my parents, to not see me completely. And for that loneliness to stem from not being seen in my case. And of course, this connects to the experience of abandonment. For me, that core wound of abandonment, I began to identify that in relationship, particularly my second marriage, when my partner left that marriage. In the first relationship, that wasn't the case. In the relationship dynamic, my first marriage, it was very different. The dynamic was different. I left that relationship, and I was never fully in that relationship, and I was still tethered to my parents in that relationship. I was still tethering on a regular basis to peers, and on a regular basis to my career and the hopes and dreams of what will happen when. And when I get to this point, then things will happen. Then happiness will come. That was very much part and parcel with that consciousness that, in a Peter Pan consciousness. That's where I came from prior to that first marriage, which I was very young when I got into that relationship at the age of 23. And there was a child that woman brought into that relationship. So there was instant family and a lot of responsibility that I certainly didn't understand completely, what level of responsibility, that entailed on an ideal level. And so, moving through that and then ending that, it came with its own challenges. Having one foot in for 10 years, I look back on my choices then and my limited awareness of knowing what a healthy relationship felt like. I didn't know. I just didn't understand. And there being a child in this relationship, and there being expectations, and there being a certain level of comfort, because with this person, I had a good connection with them most of the time. There was toxicity in the relationship as things got deeper, and as expectations that were, beyond what were practical. The expectations that this person had, in terms of my commitment to the relationship. There's this process that unfolds, this process of trying to cultivate awareness and getting nowhere, and finally needing a catalyst, something external to help push me, in that direction that I was inevitable for years, but I needed to sit in that for many years and dance in that and be out of alignment with myself, and also in relationship in terms of the standards that I have for myself now. So, am I apologetic? It's difficult to be apologetic for actions of your former self when that former self doesn't have the awareness that you have now. Would I be apologetic? Should I make similar choices? I would be changing those choices in a heartbeat, but should any of those choices unfold in that way? Yeah, profoundly apologetic. I was fully out of alignment in not speaking my truth, but not knowing one's truth, is part and parcel with, at that time, was part and parcel with not speaking my truth. And so there you have a very complex situation. And do I contain, is there still some guilt that lingers? I think there is a little bit of guilt of, I think understanding the confusion and the sorrow that I contributed to in other people, and in the child at the time, who's now an adult, obviously, and in that first marriage and that former partner, the sorrow that I would have stirred up, and it certainly would have been connected to their own past, and their own upbringing and their own part in this dance. And I got to see the other side in the second marriage, where my partner left me, and that created. I had expectations. I had a child already, so in the first marriage we had a son, and bringing that into the second marriage, so I got to play the part of the individual bringing a child into a relationship. So the roles were reversed, and the expectation that I felt, from myself, the culture at large, from my parents, and and there certainly wasn't an overt oppression. It wasn't an overt, you have to do this, you have to do that. That didn't happen. But I felt the pressure of making this work on a very high level. And something about this relationship, about being able to see deeper into my own pain through my partner in my second marriage, and a glimmer of something sacred. I didn't yet know it was within me, and to see it within her, and for that tug of war to begin with. That was our story. That for me, not being seen, I couldn't really say what it was for her. But again, it was one foot in, one foot out. This time it was her, and the longing that it stirred up in me as I began to differentiate, individuate from my parents, but any projection and attachment that I had with that family construct, and the construct of being a filmmaker, and the Peter Pan-esque aspects of thinking that the grass would be greener tomorrow when I achieve this, when I achieve that. That dream was starting to settle a little more into reality, and emotions were starting to surface, and I was getting older, nearing the age of 40, and I was beginning to near a point of transformation that was karmic, that was inevitable. And if it wasn't this relationship, it would have been somebody else. And to this day, I remember grieving that relationship, and there was so much grief, the well of tears that came up, and having a warm bath, putting tobacco in that bath, whether smoking it or putting a little tobacco, just learning about tobacco and the power of tobacco at that time. And meanwhile, working with elders, beginning to go to ceremony, beginning to sit with elders, beginning to get elder advice, deep advice, meaningful advice, perennial wisdom. I was able to use these perennial teachings while going through this very difficult time, predominantly the teaching of stay before you go, whether it's in the relationship or in your feeling world, sitting in that bathtub and wanting that pain, wanting that sorrow that was actually pain, the feeling of when you have sorrow, in my experience, and when you get into a warm bath in particular, and you track the emotion that the sorrow is coming from, and you stay with that emotion, and you believe you breathe through it, the heat that can happen, and the movement of that energy, the slow, painful movement, like hot steam slowly working its way through your body, all the while creating this indescribable pressure through your extremities. It's a phenomenon that isn't spoken about very much. You have this stored emotion, this stored energy, that's taken a form from your upbringing of experiences of abandonment, of not being seen. And there would be thousands of experiences like that in the context of somebody's imprint, over and over and over, in the context of somebody's upbringing and the ancestral trauma that comes with that, over and over and over. And so those are packed in firm. And so when you are being asked by spirit, by your karmic path, by God, by your higher self, to let go of these things, it can be excruciating. And so it becomes a rite of passage. It becomes walking through the fire. That steam is akin to walking through the fire, walking through the coals. And, of course I'd want it to end. I'd much rather get out of the bathtub and go downstairs and watch TV and eat some ice cream. Obviously, on some level, but on a deeper level, a level that I was attuned to at that time by the grace of God and through the help of this eldership, I knew that I needed to stay. And I had a dedication to that. I had a commitment to that, an inner commitment, an inner knowing that I needed to go through this threshold, these thresholds over and over and over and over. And very gradually over time, things began to lift. The veil got thinner between myself, my conscious, aware, three-dimensional self, and the spirit world. My heart, my chakras, the chakra points, the 7 chakra points from the root through to the crown, they began to align slowly, slowly, slowly. They began to align and opening to an energy that I would describe as source energy, in a very general kind of way. And my heart began to open, most importantly, my heart began to open to the light of God and to my own light, to my own understanding of what it meant to be light, to be in a state of conscious awareness, the present moment awareness. Present moment awareness comes from the book, The Presence Process by Michael Brown. Highly recommend you look into it if you're curious about what I'm talking about. At this time when I was doing these baths, going through this end of relationship, it was not long before that I'd done the presence process, and it had opened me up quite a bit to the light of God. But for me, it was such a process, for people that are blessed to hit rock bottom in one fell swoop and to be touched by God, and for their paths to be open, like presumably Eckhart Tolle, among others. That wasn't my experience. This was a very long process, and it was very gradual, and it took a great deal of commitment, and it led me to ceremony, one ceremony after another, and one of the greatest wounds, or the greatest threats that can be conveyed to another individual within a context of community is to be ostracized, to be alone. And so we come back to this notion of aloneness, of loneliness, of being alone, of being ostracized, of being abandoned, of being betrayed. We're being tested. These experiences are about our relationship with God, about us finding a relationship with God. They are about connecting to a higher power and to an aligned community. They are about praying for that connection. And as we pray for that connection with God, with Source, with the spirit world, with the hazelnut tree in our backyard, sitting with nature, being with nature, communing with nature, good things begin to happen. When we grieve, when we sit in the bathtub or just meditate in our living room and we start to feel feelings, and we move into those feelings and we go through these rites of passage alone by feeling some excruciating feelings as we go down this path, this journey inward without knowing what's on the other side. That's a fundamental part of this, is not knowing. The spirit world, God, from this third dimension in my experience, I don't believe that it exists. I know that it exists, and yet it's still not tangible. It's still about not knowing, paradoxically. And so what do we do? How do we do what we do? How do we go about this? The word that the elder speaks of, that he shares, is willingness. Willfulness versus willingness. Willful, to be willful. We use willfulness to build our house. And at the end of the day, we can pat ourselves in the back and say, I built that fucking house. I'm proud of the work that I did. And it's legit. Willingness is different. There's no plan, there's no blueprint, there's no idea of what we're trying to create. There's just an understanding that going in, feeling our hands, our fists clench. This is something that I use in ceremony and in these spaces of meditation and integration. Watching my hands unfold and surrendering to something bigger and to the feeling, as painful as it might be, and just allowing and allowing and allowing as much as I can, while still bringing a little bit of mercy to this process, to myself, as I would the external world, to the people in this world, to the people that are suffering. In ceremony, part of supporting this experience for others, and I'm playing a role in the vibration that's transferring into the bodies of these people. I've learned through my own rites of passage, through my own ceremonies, that the greatest compassion can be by allowing somebody to feel excruciating pain again and again and again through the experience of feeling, because I have an awareness while I'm working with that energy that if one is to allow and through willingness and have the willingness to move through that, getting to the other side is where you will begin to peel back the layers of other dimensions, and where you will begin to feel the light of God through truly, deeply surrendering. And in this space, that space of surrender, when we get through that challenge, those difficult feelings, that difficult experience, there is no such thing as aloneness. Even if one is alone, there is no such thing as loneliness. Even if one sits alone in that room, in that space, I know that to be true. And as the elders say, if it's true for me, it's also true for you. What's true for me is true for everybody. What's true for you is true for everybody. Not real for you, but true for you. Again, a perennial teaching that has been an important part of my path of uncovering these layers of aloneness, of isolation, of a lack of connection. And as I peel back those layers through this process, this willingness leading me into what as sometimes feels like an abyss of nothing, of, through the paradigm of nihilism into, or atheism, into an abyss of nothing, of being strictly worm food, of beyond the cosmos is just empty space and rock and fire and magma and poisonous gas and, all of these things that make up the physical world, in part. So it's hard to reconcile those concepts, that understanding, those the tangible, measurable aspects of existence, to reconcile that with there being a need for willingness, with there being a connection with something bigger, something mysterious on the other side of that experience. The fear that comes up in people, and this is just a secret now between you and I in a way, at least it feels like that. I don't want to be corny, but it feels like this is kind of like a hushed moment. The fear that most people feel around uncomfortable feelings, around uncomfortable acknowledgments, turning a blind eye, dissociating from acknowledging what's true about shadow, about the things that that are in the dark and we're trying to keep in the dark out of fear of shame, out of fear of being ostracized, out of fear of being alone, being shunned by our community. If only they knew the truth about me, they wouldn't want to be with me. Many times these things aren't even aware, but it comes up in behaviors and patterns of pushing away, of remaining isolated, remaining alone, being lonely unconsciously, intentionally, in order to protect oneself from being shunned, from being isolated, pushed away, ostracized. These are deep, deep fears. And there are deeply ingrained patterns from childhood that many of us, that maybe all of us to a degree, let's say almost all of us, carry to some degree. And the unconscious reactions that happen within us to avoid the experience of showing another individual or individuals that which may get us shunned, ostracized. The feeling of fear that comes up to protect us is so powerful that it keeps us from going in. And so, we have these experiences that happen when we're in the moment, in conversation, in an experience of socializing, in an experience of just being alive in the world, in the day, be going on with our day, going through traffic, going in the grocery store. It's difficult to fully immerse ourselves and surrender to these deeper truths of shadow and self. And so we take our time alone, in ceremony and alone. And we think of the word willingness, and we see where the tension is in our body, and we release that tension as best we can with our breath, and we begin to feel. And if we've just had a recent trigger, that's where we start. And we watch it, and we connect to it, and we feel it, and we don't shy away from it. And we do this privately. And we do this in a sacred space, in a ceremony space. And all that's required is willingness. And we have no idea what will happen from doing this. And we have no idea how many times it will take to do this in order to get to the other side of a layer. And we have no idea how many layers there are. We just know that this is the way out of aloneness. This is the way out of loneliness. This is the path towards connection to something bigger, to ourselves, to our most authentic selves, to the deepest place of our heart, and to others, to other people, to our children, to our parents, to our friends, to the four-leggeds, as they say, to the swimming ones, the flying ones, the spirit of all, the trees, the vegetation, Mother Nature, the cosmos, all of it. What could possibly be more important? Thank you very much for listening. It's dark now. I can't see the lake. It's no longer shimmering, but I can see the outline of it in the darkness here with the lights, the street lights, the lights from the houses around, creating a certain dimension to the landscape. The hazelnut, the silhouette of the hazelnut tree still lies above me. And it's a beautiful evening. I'm going to smoke some tobacco. Thank you very much for listening. This is Mark A. Lewis, Sacred Village Podcast. See you next time. Over and out. I lay my head down. Check out my lovely partner's music, Christina Jessen, at christinajessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing, you can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day. Floating down and down like a feather, I floated down and down, and I floated down and down like a feather.